Welcome into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. National Signing Day, early signing day for football, December 4th. Mizzou adds 17 members of its 2025 freshman class. Some exciting players in there, some of the guys that are going to be the future of this program. At least that's what this team hopes right now. I'm Joey Van Zummeren, joined by Michael Stamps. As always, today we're going to be taking a position by position breakdown of this Mizzou team, who they're losing, who they're possibly retaining, who at least has eligibility left. And obviously some guys could enter the transfer portal, but who has eligibility left and who they are adding in this freshman class, breaking down where that position group is heading, if they need to add in the transfer portal possibly. So today we're going to do offense, and then later in the week, we will be doing the same exact thing for the defense, along with a Kansas preview at the end of that episode a few days from now. So let's start this off. I mean, Michael, before we go into position by position, just what are your general thoughts on where this team is right now? The momentum they have, the guys are losing, but just kind of what spot they've positioned themselves in.
I would say it was definitely a win of a recruiting cycle, and especially this last week or so on National Signing Day, and it's kind of this late signing period. Some of the surprise names that Drinkwitz and his staff managed to bring in. I'm sure they weren't surprised to them, but definitely surprised to most of the outside world. Marquise Davis did not see that one coming really until after Arkansas. Demarion Folks really didn't see that coming until after Arkansas, and Javion Hilson especially. That was not a name I don't think many people had on their radar, and he's obviously a top 50, top 100 prospect. So the national recruiting poll that Drinkwitz has really managed, not even just this cycle, but last one, and some of his earlier ones. The national recruiting is definitely getting there. He pulled a couple guys from Ohio, a couple Florida guys, a couple Texas guys. Obviously, Zoller's up in Pennsylvania. So some positive stuff to build on. It seems like, he didn't necessarily get the 5-star talent. I know, Hilson has some 5-star ratings here and there, and I believe Zollers does as well. Obviously, you lose out on Lamont Rogers, which sucks, but kind of seems like Jack Lang is going to be the cornerstone for this freshman class on the offensive line. So you don't end up with any true 5-star, consensus 5-star talent, but it does seem that there's a lot of guys who are really solid and have great, fundamentals at their position. A lot of these rankings are really based on athleticism and how high of a ceiling they have, and that's great. And you do want those guys on your team so you can mold them and develop them into those players that they could be. From what I've watched and seen so far from a lot of these guys, there are guys with those high ceilings, but also seems like there are just a lot of players who might be able to come in right away and give you valuable minutes. Or valuable snaps, I guess. And, we're not the head coaches or on the coaching staff, so we're not gonna be making those decisions. But there certainly are guys who can come in and play day one, and for the fan base, and then obviously you cross your fingers if you're Eli Drinkwitz and your coaching staff that you're going to be able to keep this momentum going into the transfer portal. Haven't heard much on that front, rumors wise. Twitter hopes and prays for certain names to end up on this team, especially at the quarterback spot. And we might get into that here in a second, but haven't heard much on that front yet. I would imagine now that, probably after Friday, that when signing day and those NLIs are signed, I would imagine the transfer portal craziness will pick up a little bit more and get even more berserk and, throughout the whole bowl game process as well.
One thing that I wanted to pick on in your answer there was the national pool, recruiting wise, that Mizzou has created, and is evident in this class, especially with their quarterback Matt Zollers, number 7th ranked quarterback in this class. And as much as the focus for Eli Drinkwitz and this Mizzou program under him has been for these past few years, has been recruiting those in-state guys, making sure, especially a talent-rich city like St. Louis, those guys consistently are coming to the state school and they're not losing that talent elsewhere. That's obviously important, but Drinkwitz also talked about today knowing, having to decipher, okay, what guys can actually play at the SEC level, what guys in the St. Louis, Missouri area, they have to actually still be up to the standard that Mizzou has. So there's that. And obviously that the fact that getting Williams Nwaneri last year, top ranked prospect in Missouri, and then Jack Lane this year, another top ranked prospect in Missouri, and then pursuing Jackson Cantwell heavily for the class of 2026, who will be playing at Faroe Field this week for the state championships with Nixa. Obviously, that's important. They're getting those top end guys in the state, but also eventually you have to look elsewhere. And the fact that they were able to pull so much top end talent from elsewhere is a really encouraging sign for this team as a brand. And I think, as Drinkwitz mentioned, I mean, he mentioned Luther Burden and the importance of growing Mizzou's presence in the St. Louis area, but also I think to have a star like that is so big. He was as great of stories as Cody Schrader and Brady Cook were. Luther Burden was the gateway to that for a lot of people. Pun not intended there. But the gateway for a lot of people to Mizzou football and to those other players on that team. And obviously playing in the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State was a big part of that. And we'll talk about the bowls this year. But I think if Mizzou can play, they're being projected and by some people to play against Michigan in a bowl game. I think that would be a really great opponent for them, just because of, again, Michigan isn't great this year. They're definitely going through a transition year. They're not going to end the year ranked, most likely, but a massive brand, just like Ohio State was. So there's that. Getting some more national pool, which is big. On to our position by position roster breakdown. Starting off with quarterback, obviously losing Brady Cook and J.R. Blood, retaining Drew Pine, Sam Horn, and Aiden Glover, of course, barring any transfer portal moves, and then adding true freshman Matt Zollers to the group for sure. And this is the one that, as you mentioned, Michael, a lot of people have had their eyes on. Mizzou, you would think, is going to be top players for any of those top quarterbacks that have entered the portal. It seems like the top names that we have right now are kind of going to be the top of the selection. I don't see any more surprises coming, and really even like the guys in the SEC, Connor Weigman, Jackson Arnold, would not surprise us at all. So and then there's been Miller Moss was a surprise, I would say, out of USC. So definitely some names to watch there. And what we're going through with each of these positions is, do they need to add in the transfer portal? And with quarterback, answer is absolutely yes. Well, I would think on the outside, that's definitely the answer. On the inside, they have confidence in Drew Pine, but I would absolutely expect them to try to add elsewhere. And even if that ends up being a 3-man competition between Pine, Horn, and whoever this guy is, I definitely think, even just for the fact alone that, a quarterback room of Aiden Glover, Drew Pine, and Sam Horn isn't very deep. You'd want to add a guy to compete in there. And really how Matt Zollers fits into this picture is that he really seems to be the quarterback of the future for Mizzou. But even with his gruesome lower body injury that he suffered near the start of this high school season, wasn't going to start his true freshman season. So they need a bridge guy. And luckily for them, with a transfer portal, there's never been a better time in college football to look for a bridge stopgap guy that can still lead you there. So, Michaels, we'll talk a little bit about Zollers after this, but just kind of what are your thoughts on Mizzou's outlook in the transfer portal with quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say a rule of thumb, but I wouldn't be surprised. And I'm going to try. It's probably good if we both try our best not to speculate on exact players that are going to, maybe think about leaving. So I'm not going to say I think this guy's going to leave. I wouldn't be surprised if one guy comes in, one guy probably leaves, just because, having 5 scholarship guys at the quarterback spot, probably a little unusual. And let's face it, Pine and Horn and a hypothetical transfer. Maybe Aiden Glover. We don't really, know much of what he's shown us yet, but those are guys who could probably start, especially Pine and Horn, and guys who are going to want their opportunity to play either at Missouri or somewhere else. So including a freshman or a transfer quarterback Uh, wouldn't be surprised if one of those guys left. So just something to think about there. But yeah, I mean, Miller Moss, Jackson Arnold, Connor Weigman, all I would imagine fit what Eli Drinkwitz would be looking for in a quote unquote bridge quarterback. Um, Something to keep in mind is if Zollers is the quarterback of the future. I don't know how fast they want to get him on the field, but Arnold is a sophomore, I believe, freshman or sophomore. I think he's one of the two. But Weigman is also a sophomore, so I feel like if you're bringing in Arnold or Weigman, that's more than a bridge quarterback. That's your quarterback of the future, which is why personally I would shift my just my opinion would be Miller Moss would be the top guy because he's only going to have one, at most two, but probably only 1 year of eligibility. And he's proven himself on a high level. Struggled a little bit this year, but transitioning to a new conference, I mean, so much goes into that. So he's proven he can play at a high level against high level defenses and high competition. He's always had really good receiving threats and a pretty good offensive line. So he's going to have that at Missouri. So that's not going to be an adjustment or anything like that. He's going to have talent around him. And I feel like a pretty good, playbook as well. So Miller Moss would probably be, if I, in my opinion, the name I put at the top of that list, especially if Zollers really is the quarterback of the future, might not make sense to bring in a Jackson Arnold or a Connor Weigman who's going to have 2 or 3 more years, because those guys are good and have potential and have shown flashes, but have also struggled and are still developing. Miller Moss might be Miller Moss and not getting much better or much worse.
Really interested to see what quarterbacks they go after. I think they almost, with the situation they're in, you can't be too picky. And obviously the NIL negotiations behind the scene play a big part in this. But with Drinkwitz's offense and with Garby Moore's merging with that too, just they want guys that can extend the play, that are able to roll out of the pocket. Miller Moss, obviously, that more of a pocket passer. But you do bring up a good point of just Connor Weigman's and Jackson Arnold's youth and how long do you want that bridge? And obviously, at whatever point you want to get out of it, you can, I guess. But again, I'm interested to see how picky they are and who they end up going with there. So that leads me to Matt Zollers, and it really feels like this is their guy. Like I said, they're quarterback of the future. They're handpicked starter for the next few years. Besides this one and possibly the year after that too. But this is the first starting quarterback, hypothetically, then that Eli Drinkwitz and his staff handpick at Mizzou. Connor Bazelak was not recruited by them. Brady Cook was not recruited by them. And obviously they've recruited quarterbacks before that, you add a quarterback with every single class, and Sam Warren is one of those. But this seemingly being the first one that they will handpick themselves, develop all the way up as a freshman to a starter. So a lot on the line there with Matt Zollers. And it seems like from what I just described of the, it doesn't necessarily have to be a dual threat, but just somebody that is quick enough to read defenses quick enough and to raw the pocket quick enough to be able to really work in this wide zone offense where you really play off of that wide zone running quite a bit. So, Michael, I mean, we've probably talked about Matt Zollers before on the show. A lot of people know about him, but just a quick rehash on that Pittsburgh area product.
I don't want to scare people by saying what I'm about to say, and maybe I haven't watched enough Matt Zollers film for this to be a justifiable opinion, but I think he has a little bit of Brady Cook in him. I see that in the leadership qualities he has. I'm actually being serious. He has in the leadership qualities, and it just sounds like they've revolved this entire recruiting class around him. And Drinkwitz said, earlier today at a sign day press conference that Zollers and a whole bunch of guys, we're in a group chat. I think it was like Jack Lang was in there, some of the local guys, but trying to recruit, other guys to come play for this team. And to me, that just screams leader. But he's mobile. He can make some off-platform, on the run throws. He's very athletic. So some similarities there. he might have a hint more of athleticism than Brady Cook, and he might be a guy you can truly design more runs for, which will be a fun aspect. And he's a playmaker and a creator. And I feel like the technical aspect of things and efficiency and processing will be something he's able to adapt with. He seems coachable. So, I mean, I think there's every reason to be excited, and also just the name value. It's not like this is a middle of the pack recruit. I mean, he's a top 100 guy, and it kind of seems to me that that's not always been the occurrence at the quarterback spot for Missouri, and that this is a guy that Missouri fans really need to be excited for.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the flack that Brady Cook would get, or a lot of the material that Brady Cook haters would use, especially over this year, even after the success he had in 2023, was that he was never a highly ranked recruit. So was he ever really good? Which I think is ridiculous. But with Matt Zoller is the opposite case. Again, like I mentioned at the top of this, a national guy that was, they didn't have just the kind of the mid-tier of St. Louis or Missouri guys to pick from at quarterback position. They actually went out there and got one of the top 10 guys nationally. So again, big pickup for Mizzou in this class. And like you said, really feels like the central one of this. Moving on to running back, kind of a interesting one here, because I really do like a lot of these guys they're retaining. They'll just have to make the decision, are any of them ready to be a number one feature back? So they're losing Nate Noel, Marcus Carroll, retaining Jamal Roberts, Kawan Lacey, and Tavares Jones. Tavares Jones, most experienced out of that group. Limited playing time this year, probably the least out of these three. If any, he edged out Kawan Lacey by just a little bit. But the clearest feature back, or the guy you would think they'd rely the most out on this group, is Jamal Roberts. They love his protection skills as a pass blocker, and obviously too on that Brady Cook touchdown in that Arkansas game. A lot of people have pointed out this great block that Jamal Roberts plays. He clearly has that. He's a really tough runner, almost a mix of Nate Noel, Marcus Carroll's running style, where he can be a bit of a bruiser, but he has some really nice speed too, so that helps him out in the receiver game. Tavares Jones, speedster. Same with Quan Lacey. Really like some of the potential he showed. And then they're adding Brennan Haygood, a 4-star, and then Marquise Davis, a 3-star. I might have those flipped. But flipping those two recruits at the deadline. Michael, what do you feel about this running back group right now?
Well, one, obviously, just in general, we're getting the first kind of crop of transfer portal recruits. Mostly teams that aren't going to have much bowl game hopes or and that sort of thing. So the best of the transfer portal is not here yet at all. This is just the first wave of guys, and there are big names for sure. That being said, we talked about quarterback. Might be one of the lower, just talent-wise, one of the lower-rated positions in the entire transfer portal. Just doesn't seem like there's going to be a lot of high major or low major options there. Running back is always a recruitable position out of the transfer portal. We saw that last year. Missouri gets two guys who come from smaller schools. They move up and were pretty darn good. So I wouldn't be surprised if they bring one in. Maybe two. I feel like you mentioned Jamal Roberts. He had a 17 carry game and a 13 carry game, 13 carries against Oklahoma, 17 against Alabama. He showed that he can, produce with volume, and he did a little bit with a couple carries against Mississippi State and Arkansas too. He showed that he could be productive with some volume carries. I also think it's worth noting that the value he brings as a pass blocker and run blocker, but primarily in the pass blocking, that's been raved about all season. It was raved about in the spring and leading up in the summer and fall and all that good stuff. So I feel like that alone could also earn him some time. As a receiver, he is raved about. I don't think he was utilized much in the receiving game this year, but that's something that you can look ahead to. He's young. I feel like he really has some value. I don't know if he's ready to be a lead back yet, but it might be worth getting one guy who's experienced that Roberts can be RB2 for one more season. And then he could kind of explode to that role. Kewan Lacey definitely has the most potential out of anybody that's on the team right now. Super explosive. He's powerful. He's a fun runner and did a good amount with, again, not a lot of carries, only 23 carries this year. He's just a fun player, and with more touches. Same thing with Roberts. When they both get more touches, I think they're going to make the most of those. Tavarius Jones kind of seems like the odd man out, especially bringing in Haygood and Marquise Davis. I mean, I don't remember the exact stat, but I was doing my reading on Marquise Davis around the time he committed, and I think he had like a 400-yard rushing game and like 8 touchdowns earlier this season, which would imagine is against, not the best Cleveland competition, but still, I mean, that speaks for itself that clearly he's a very talented player. And Haygood, his recruitment just exploded over the last month or so for good reason. He's very talented. So a lot of young talent. It makes perfect sense to bring in one older, experienced guy. Wouldn't be surprised if he is not in the transfer portal yet. Maybe he is. I don't really know, but definitely would imagine an experienced 3 or 4 year veteran at the running back spot will be one of the additions they look towards.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because, again, with just the NIL money they seem to be willing to shell out, feels like a missed opportunity. I mean, Jamal Roberts definitely deserves an opportunity. I think he'll get that next year regardless, but I think it'd be a missed opportunity for them not to go after a real playmaker in the portal there. On to the wide receiver position. Really interesting group to look at here. Obviously, you're losing your top 3 guys from each of the past 2 seasons, and Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, and Mookie Cooper. And all of those guys kind of bring unique skill sets that they'll have to replace. Retaining Marquise Johnson, Joshua Manning, James Madison, Courtney Crutchfield, Daniel Blood just feels like so much potential in that room there. And then adding just an incredible wide receiver group at freshman with Sean Terry, Donovan Olugbo from IMG Academy, and then Demarion Falcos. So again, it kind of feels a little bit like the running back position. And again, could see 1 or 2 of these guys transfer out. But I feel like at least with these guys returning of Marquise Johnson, Daniel Blood, and Joshua Manning that we've seen, they really have defined skill sets. Marquise Johnson, I think, can be an electric deep threat as a speedster. Daniel Blood as a yakster, and then Joshua Manning as a big body guy that's great in run blocking. All 3 of those guys have had flashes. All 3 of those guys had good fall camps, apparently. And I think those are guys you can build a wide receiver room around. James Madison and Courtney Crutchfield, both 2 of the top wide receivers in the class of 2024 that have exciting potential. And then these 3 guys. But again, it feels like it would be a missed opportunity for them not to add a playmaker at wide receiver. It even already feels with some of the guys that have entered the portal in the SEC, with Danke out of Kentucky, Davion from Arkansas, that there could be a top playmaker out there available for them that they could use as almost as a stopgap bridge guy until they have a better feel for how these guys are developing. I mean, first, Michael, before you get into your full answer on just what you're feeling about this wide receiver group, where do you see Courtney Crutchfield and James Madison getting a role this year? Because I would expect them in the upcoming season they would.
It seems as far I don't know exactly, and what they're actually going to be doing on the field. Maybe not as predictable, but if you want a comparison, look what Joshua Manning did this year. Look what that sort of thing. Manning's a good staple for that, having redshirt. And then did Manning redshirt? Or did he just not play as freshman?
No, he was on special teams a lot, so he earned his red shirt.
Okay, so didn't really play much at the receiver position. So that was his first year, hypothetical red shirt, I guess. And I don't believe Madison or Crutchfield burned their red shirt, so they're going to be freshmen, right? I believe that's correct. Okay, perfect. So, they both still have 4 years, and it might just be easing them into the offense. Manning got eased into the offense this year, and I think by the amount of snaps he was getting by the end of the year, he was like getting the most or second most snaps at the receiver spot out of anybody. And he made a couple big plays here and there. I would expect his role to be bigger, but I would imagine Crutchfield and Madison just get slowly eased in to this receiver room, and then kind of let it work from there. They're both very talented, especially Crutchfield. I think there's going to be Missouri fans who, both want them to be on this team very badly next year. It's going to be an uncomfortably crowded receiver room with a lot of young talent. Like you mentioned, it's a great comparison, very similar to the running backs, where there's a lot of guys who have had flashes and have high potential, but they're all young. And I mean, the most proven guy in this group is probably Marquise Johnson. I don't know if we mentioned Mekhi Miller in there. He has another year, and he didn't do much of anything this year. He's like experience-wise and seasons-wise has the most snaps out of anybody, but I don't know if that's a guy you really want as one of your top 3 options. So they need experience. Receiver is going to be an extremely hot position out of the portal this year.
Now, with Madison and Crutchfield has a little bit more experience in the slot because I'm pretty sure Madison was more of the played on the boundary as almost a, maybe not a contested catch big body guy like Theo Weiss, but I remember his highlight reel having a few like spectacular one-handed catches on the sideline, but Crutchfield has a little bit more versatility.
Yes. Yeah. No, Madison is 6'3", so he is just kind of an athletic, bit of a freak and a definite jump ball guy. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he was at the beginning of the year they had him fielding punts and kickoffs. He never did anything, obviously, but I think that was a potential option for him there.
Right. So obviously with Luther leaving the position, you're replacing there a slot, and Daniel Blood can play that. But then after that, I possibly a role for Courtney Crutchfield to step up there, or whoever they add in the transfer portal. I mean, that's usually where your biggest playmakers play. On to tight ends, just losing Tyler Stevens here. A pretty exciting group, I would say, just with the duo of Brett Norfleet and then Jordan Harris. I think the development of Jordan Harris was pretty big this season, just for the future outlook of this position for Missouri, as many of those receiving and blocking tight ends that you can get, again, in this wide zone offense are going to be super important. And Norfleet is stellar at both. I thought he was going to be much more important this year, and obviously injuries derailed that quite a bit for him. And then Jordan Harris really took that opportunity, made the most of it. Behind them, you got Jude James and Whit Hafer, 2 members of the 2024 class, who we didn't see much of this past season. But Jude James, just a really athletic receiver, was recruited as an athlete, could have played safety, could have played wide receiver or tight end, but they put him at tight end. Maybe they change that, but I would think it's too far into the process. He's been trained as a tight end now. And then Whit Hafer, who is just a massive body, who I'm not sure too much of him as wide receiver. I know as a blocker is pretty great as well. And they're adding Dakota Terrell in this group, who just off of pure body size, I feel like Dakota Terrell might take a little bit to develop into his frame and develop into that position. But with the 2 guys right there, or, with Norfleet and Jordan Harris, they're in a good spot. And then Jude James and Whit Hafer, I feel like add some solid depth to this group. So I can't say I necessarily see them adding anyone in the portal. Tyler Stevens was pretty non-existent in this group this year. So with the continued development of Jude James and Whit Hafer, I can't see them adding in this group. Michael, do you agree? And what do you think about Dakota Terrell?
Yeah, I can't say I disagree. I feel like Whit Hafer is kind of a next similar spot as Jordan Harris as from a blocking standpoint. I think Harris we saw his hands develop a little bit. He had probably a couple catches this year and maybe a couple drops too. But so honestly, wouldn't expect anybody besides Brett Norfleet and Jordan Harris to play significantly next year. I'm not sure what Drew James brings to the table as a blocker. You might know better than me, Joey. It seems like if as long as Norfleet and Jordan Harris are healthy, Drew James might be the next guy up because of his receiving capability. Haven't seen much of that from Jordan Harris. Again, here and there, like I said. Whit Hafer, to me, just seems like an extra offensive lineman. Dakota Terrell, I'm not really sure what to think of him yet. When I first saw his commitment, I was like, wow, this is a small forward or a power forward. He is a freak of nature athletically. 24/7 lists him as 6'7", 215. So that is a fascinating build for the tight end spot. Athletic player. That's really the main thing. The hands are still coming along. The route running is still coming along. High school was kind of just a guy that you could throw the ball up to, and he's bigger than everyone. It's kind of like having a 7-foot center in high school, right? You can just throw the ball up to him, and he's going to dunk over everybody. Same thing, same kind of idea with Dakota Terrell. You can just throw the ball up to him, and it's kind of hard to stop a guy who's 6'7" from catching the ball. So kind of the main thing right now, he's going to have to fill out for sure 215. Or around that area, 210, 220 is probably not going to be big enough for SEC football. He's going to have to put on some weight for sure. Wouldn't be surprised if that's a redshirt candidate, but nice. He's an interesting project. The interesting thing is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, Joey. Brett Norfleet, Norfleet's a sophomore, and Harris is a sophomore. So theoretically, they have at least another year, maybe more, of both of those guys. Obviously, Norfleet is going to be, I would imagine, a name that pops up on next year's draft boards, the tight end spot.
Right.
But he's going to have another year at least, and Jordan Harris as well. So this seems like a spot they, all things considered, and crazier things that have happened, and people could leave or go to the NFL. But this seems like a spot they have locked down for another year, maybe more. And Jude James is developable. Whit Hafer is developable. I know there's 2026 tight ends in the state of Missouri and around the state of Missouri that the Tigers have had here frequently. I've seen a couple of them myself, down on the sideline before games on visits. So more than likely, this is a position that is not going to be touched for maybe another year or more as far as the transfer portal goes. I would imagine they bring in one tight end every recruiting class. So that'll happen. But as far as the portal goes, unless something crazy happens, definitely not going to be anything.
Yeah. As far as Jude James and Whit Hafer, it will be interesting to see in the spring. I feel like we're going to get a much better idea of those guys. Both of them, when there was a time during fall camp where both Brett and Jordan were dealing with injuries, and Drinkwitz was really impressed with both Jude and Whit for stepping up and taking those opportunities. Jude played a considerable amount on special teams this season. But again, hard to tell until we really get a look in the spring. I will say Jude James came in about 200 pounds. And now on Mizzou's website, he's listed as 222. So compared to Dakota Terrell, where he's, what did he say, 6'8"?
6'7". I mean, conflicting reports. A lot of different people, a lot of different places say different stuff. But around 6'6", 6'7", 6'8".
Sure. So for Jude James to be at 6'2", 222 is a pretty good frame at tight end. I'm sure still have a little bit more work to do to develop him. But again, we'll have a better idea of that in the spring. So excited for that position. Like you said, pretty solid there. As you mentioned, there was a 2026 or 7 tight end that they offered yesterday, who is from Francis Howell High School. But Jude and Brett went to Francis Howell North, I believe, and there's other Francis Howells, but they love their Francis Howell tight ends apparently.
It's a pipeline.
Exactly. On to the offensive line here, an interesting group, especially because there is some real young talent here that Mizzou has been developing, and Talon Chandler, who was a freshman this year, and then Logan Reichert, who I gotta think this upcoming season competes heavily for a job. But then losing a handful of starters, but they'll probably shuffle a few guys around. But just going by position of their starters from this year, they're losing Marcus Bryant at left tackle. At left guard, they're keeping Caden Green. Center, it was announced that Connor Tollison is going to stay for this last year. Right guard, they're losing Cameron Johnson. Right tackle, a really big question in Armand Mimbu if he decides to declare for the NFL draft. Some projections have him as high as a second, third round pick right now. So up to him if he wants to end up declaring that, obviously. Something to watch there for sure. Um, what I mean by shuffling guys around, they're Caden Green might move him over to left tackle, but they also have Javen Richardson, who came in as a JUCO transfer before this upcoming season and competed with Marcus Bryant for that starting left tackle job for a bit. The loss of Drake Heismeyer is, it becomes more important after seeing just the depth and reliability he provided. Mitch Walter still has another year of eligibility, which is a big depth piece and experience for them to retain. I feel like they're going to add somewhere. If Armand Mimbu leaves, then definitely. But again, I feel like Logan Reichert's got to slide in here somewhere, possibly compete. If they move Caden Green over, then both guard jobs are going to be open, and that's definitely a spot where Logan Reichert could compete at. Kansas City native. They're adding in this class Jack Lane, Henry Fanuku from the Texas, and then Keaton Jones as well. So anytime with offensive linemen, I feel like it's incredibly rare. I mean, it is at any position, but incredibly rare to see a true freshman contributing there. So if she's like, I don't know where, because again, there's going to be moving pieces, shuffling guys that you're already keeping, and the questions of Mimbu and whatever else depth wise you're losing. But I got to think they're adding at least one guy in this transfer portal. How do you feel about that, Michael?
Yeah, and actually, I believe Drakewitz and the staff already reached out to a guard guard transfer. This is a very butcherable name, Mahamane Musa, I believe. He's an offensive guard for Purdue. I believe he started there for 2 years, had some injury troubles this year, but as a multi-year Power 5 starter, obviously Purdue was not the best this year, but still has Power 5 experience. So that's a guy that I know it's early on. So don't know if he's a take yet, but definitely someone to keep an eye on as far as the transfer portal goes. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I feel like at this point, Logan Reichert's still here, which means they have to like what they have in him, and he's a local guy. And I feel like that's something they value more times than not on the offensive line. So he could play at multiple spots. I don't know where he's probably a guard spot, but I don't know where he slots in on this team right now. But I would agree with the statement that he's going to get playing time. The loss of Drake Heismeyer, like you mentioned, seems significant, but I could be wrong here. But I feel like there was some chatter about Talon Chandler at the beginning of the year and him competing for that backup center spot. So I don't want to speculate or anything, but that might be a guy they have some faith in, and maybe with some good growth over the offseason, that's a guy that they can at least throw in special teams for some security there, and he can back up Connor Tollison. I don't know if Talon Chandler's the guy there, or if they bring in someone else, or make sure that there's someone else on the offensive line that could take snaps at center. I would imagine having someone who can back Tollison up is going to be a priority, because that's a kind of a re-injurable injury that Tollison picked up. So that's going to be something that they I would imagine they keep an eye on, whether that's training someone else or having someone ready that's already there slot in, or bringing someone else in. Maybe it's a guard who has versatility or things like that. But yeah, I mean, wouldn't be surprised to if they bring in a transfer. I don't foresee any of these guys, any of the freshmen starting on the offensive line. I think Lang is definitely the best one, but that would be a pretty hefty ask, I think, to ask him to come in and start right away. So I don't see any freshmen doing that. I would imagine they bring in someone else. And I didn't even mention Armand Membo. That's probably the biggest NFL draft decision on this team. Really, the only one with a hint of speculation. So luckily, he's from the state of Missouri, so I think there might be some pull there, and seems like he has a good relationship with a lot of the guys in this team. So maybe there's some hope and faith there, but if not, then you're looking at probably 2 portal additions on the offensive line, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree there. So talking about Armand Membo, that kind of recaps our position by position breakdown offensively. Again, we'll be doing the same thing for the defense in a few days here. I did want to talk a little bit about just the All-Star games for these guys that are leaving. Brady Cook accepted an invite to the the Electric Boogaloo, the Hula Bowl in Orlando in January to play in that. And it got me thinking just about the other All-Star games that Mizzou guys are going to be playing in. Luther, I'd be surprised if he plays in the Senior Bowl. It's just, there's first round talent for sure that plays in the Senior Bowl every year, but it's mainly for guys that really have something to gain. And I definitely think Luther Burden, if he has a really good combine week, I think that's going to help him out a ton if he has, if he tests well, especially with Territorio McMillan to kind of get on top of him as a wide receiver 1 in this class. So there, but I don't see him participating in the Senior Bowl. There's quite a few guys from Mizzou on the Senior Bowl watch list, though. Luther, Marcus Carroll, Joseph Charleston, Brady was on it. Cameron Johnson, Armand, Tristan, Nate, Drayden Norwood, Johnny Walker Jr., Theo Weiss, and Christian Williams. The second tier of this is the Shrine Bowl. I would definitely think Johnny and Theo feel close to me as Shrine Bowl. Marcus Bryant is definitely a guy to watch too. Nate Noel as well. So be interesting to see this representation. I don't think it's going to be anything like last year where Mizzou had 7, 8 guys at the Senior Bowl and then 7 guys at the Combine as well. But certainly some respectable talent or respectable additions to those lists. Any thoughts there, Michael, on who you expect to be in January?
I mean, I would like to think Johnny and Theo improved their draft stock a pretty good amount. So Shrine Bowl is not a bad bet. They might have some Senior Bowl hopes, but it's kind of on the fence there. I don't really disagree with much of anything you said. I mean, Christian Chuck Hicks is going to have a hard time getting drafted because he's so old. Corey Flagg might have some pull there in the Shrine Bowl, but yeah, I mean, we were talking about this earlier. If you invited to one like Brady in the Hula Bowl, are you allowed to participate in others? Do we know how that works? I'm not too sure.
I haven't looked it up, but I don't think I would think the answer is no.
Okay, so I guess if Brady is playing in the Hula Bowl, then nothing else there for him. But yeah, I mean, Theo seems like a guy who could be a day 2, day 3 pick. Second, third, fourth round guy. Second might be pushing it, but third and fourth, he definitely has some desirable NFL traits, and I think Johnny Walker does as well. So there's going to be some stuff there. Christian Williams, Shrine Bowl guy. Flagg, Shrine Bowl guy. Did we mention Tristan Newsom? I feel like he could be a Senior Bowl guy. Senior or Shrine Bowl.
I will say, I just looked it up. You can play as many All-Star games as you wish.
Okay, so I would imagine Brady plays in more than just the Hula Bowl then. Probably gets into the Shrine Bowl, the Senior Bowl, probably pushing it. But maybe crazier things have probably happened. So yeah, you made a good point that I think the representation will definitely be less significant. I mean, I would love to see when draft boards and scouting and evaluations and testing and all that starts become more prevalent, where Joseph Charleston fits in. I feel like he might have some veteran presence, late round draft appeal, but that's just not much there. And then it'll also be interesting to see where Noel and Carroll slide into that. I wonder if Noel's health issues and injuries this year are going to hinder his draft hopes, because he could have really had a nice, statistical season at least if he'd ever got hurt. So those will also be interesting to keep an eye on. But I don't see the representation being anywhere, near what it was last year, like you said.
Yeah, and the thing is with Luther, though, just to have first top 15 pick since Sheldon Richardson, I believe, for this program, which is just going to be massive. And at least, I mean, it depends what team drafts him, obviously, but I feel like as a guy that could be an immediate contributor in the NFL. So that's big. Only other thing I want to talk about on the show was possible bowl games for Mizzou. Eli Drinkwitz was joking with us. I'm not going to say anything that he said, but joking with us about the bowl game possibilities for this team. And really the top three, and I mentioned it at the top for possible opponents, but top three bowl game options: Music City Bowl in Nashville, Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, and then the Las Vegas Bowl. Citrus Bowl seems like a very far shot, especially with how many SEC teams are going to be pretty good but not make the playoffs. And obviously, like, this does depend a little bit on what ends up happening this weekend in the conference title games. But I still, no matter what, I see both Georgia and Texas making it. For the SEC, I don't see South Carolina and Alabama making it in. That'd be pretty crazy. So it feels like the SEC, we know what SEC teams are going to be in, what teams are going to be out of the playoffs. And for Mizzou, it's difficult. Again, for the Citrus Bowl, there's South Carolina's ahead of them. Alabama might not make the playoffs, and they're ahead of them. Ole Miss probably not going to make the playoffs, and ahead of them. Feel like I have to be forgetting a few here. But they're going to be third, fourth SEC team here, and so do with that what you will. As far as the opponents are being projected to play, a few popular ones have been. Michigan has always been a popular one. Illinois has been, and so I mean, there's a good number of SEC Big Ten matchups. So could be an interesting one. I think Illinois and Kansas State, those were both being discussed at one point, would be fun just because of the fact that they're rivals at least. So, this game is definitely going to matter to Mizzou. I don't think they're going to have many opt-outs, as Drinkwitz mentioned, but Luther Burden's not going to be playing in it. They're going to be going up. I mean, if they're playing Michigan, they're going up against a 6-7 win team. So to play against Illinois or Kansas State, I mean, Illinois is probably going to end the year ranked, but to play against a rival would just add some extra juice to this bowl game. Michael, do you have any preferences on this or?
I mean, obviously I do our bowl projection, story every week. So it's been kind of interesting since I started doing it to see the trajectory and which ones change. For the most part, Music City Bowl against Michigan in Nashville has been the most consistently projected bowl across the 5 or 6 sites I take a scan at every single week for the last couple of weeks, last 3 or 4 weeks, really. So Las Vegas Bowl against some form of Big Ten opponent would probably be, one that I would be expecting. You mentioned Illinois. I would, keep an eye on an Iowa, maybe a USC, maybe a Washington, a couple of those more middle of the pack teams. Maybe, I mean, I don't know if those guys are a step ahead of Michigan as far as overall talent, but this season had, better records. So maybe those are some teams to keep an eye out there. The Gator Bowl is majority against ACC opponents, a Syracuse, a Louisville. I saw one against Miami, which would be quite the matchup. I don't know off the top of my head where Miami was in the playoff, but I do know based on what I saw on Twitter that they were not in the top 12. So, that would probably probably be a stretch and also would be the toughest opponent they could face, which would be a fun matchup, I would imagine, but I wouldn't expect that. So if it's the Gator Bowl, keep an eye on like a Syracuse, on a Louisville, more of a middle of the pack or, towards the higher end, but not making the playoff ACC team. Syracuse just got a big win against Miami, so that would be probably a pretty fun game. And, Kyle McCord is a fun quarterback. So there'll be some stuff there, but I don't really know how to guess or estimate or project or predict or whatever where they're going to play. I don't really know what goes into that, and I wouldn't have any basis for it, but kind of seems to me like right now the Music City Bowl in Nashville against Michigan, USC, Washington, Iowa, Illinois would be the most likely option. I don't know about if you have a preference of any of those teams, Joey. Illinois for the rivalry's sake, Michigan because it's a big brand name. I don't know how good Washington or Iowa are off the top of my head. I have a gut feeling that I really wouldn't want to play Iowa, but I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
Yeah, I don't think that'd make for a very exciting offensive game, at least.
No.
I mean, is there any world where Mizzou can play UNLV for the Barry Odom revenge game? Like, I'm down for that. I guess that would.
I don't know what that
they're
would.
playing Boise State.
I have no idea what that would constitute. I
don't think there's any SEC bowl games against Mountain West, so
I have a feeling you're probably right.
So yeah, I mean, Miami would be really exciting. They are ranked number 12, but they are just because of the bracket, they are not in. They're not in the bracket as of now, and so it's been really fun. And I'm almost more glad that Mizzou is not going through this frenzy right now of. Like, I mean, before these latest rankings came out, it seemed like a pretty logical thing to say. Like, if they beat South Carolina, they would probably be in heavy consideration. But man, with everything going on with the bracket, a lot of interesting discussions to be had. And I think Shane Beamer did a great job in his press conference today, describing his thoughts and just kind of the unpredictability of it. So Gary Pinkel, I'm sure, is doing as much as he can with that committee. But that's all we have for you here today on the All Things Mizzou podcast. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope you tune in to the rest of our coverage again. We'll be back here in just a few days to do the same exact thing for the Mizzou football defense and look ahead for that big Mizzou basketball game against Kansas.